I think it's also really hard for women to put those boundaries and to say, I cannot do this, to say no. I think that took me at least a couple of years to really like figure out that I was saying yes to everything and needed to stop because it's
Yeah.
overwhelming and tired. And then your relationships start failing, your business starts failing, everything just kind of goes downhill. And you're like, I don't know, it's a season, I'm in a slump. And then you realize you just said yes to many, to too many things. Welcome back to the Virtual Antics podcast. I am so excited because today I'm here with corporate executive Victoria Pelletier. How are you, Victoria?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. I am so excited and I'm really interested in hearing your story. Can you tell me a little bit about where you started and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. And it's good you said where I got started because I actually, through a lot of the coaching and mentoring I realized at some point I was doing a disservice to those that I worked with without kind of telling them where I came from. Everyone saw me as this really driven woman, and I realized I had to tell them my why, if you will. Simon Sinek, start with why. And so mine is, really poor beginnings. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me. So I was removed from her care, went in and out. And although I am fortunate that I was later adopted by a family who actually knew, or parents who knew my biological mother. And, fortunate, no further abuse, lots of love in that household, lower socioeconomic status, however. And so part of my drive in work started by working at a very young age at 11. So I never had to, worry about going without food or clothes, but there was not much else for the basics in that family. So no school trips, we didn't do vacations as a family, etc. And so I probably at around like 11, I remember my mom said to me, Tori, which was her nickname for me, she said, "You need to do better than us." And I can tell you honestly, Natalie, she didn't need to say that to me, because for me, I was determined I was going to be better than the biology of Julie, the woman that I was born to, and her drug addicted lifestyle, who later landed her in jail later, to the lower socioeconomic status. So that I knew that I was going to be better than the biology or circumstance. So that's my why, and that's where it started. And I'll pause and see if you have a question before I then tell you where the journey's taken me and where I am now.
No, that's really interesting, and I can completely relate because I was a foster kid, had my own newspaper route, and was on this like really pathetic bike that kept like leaning over while delivering newspapers. So I definitely understand that drive to be better, and I think that's amazing. So yeah, tell me what happened next.
Well, so I started working at 11. I worked in a hair salon doing everything except cutting hair. And then by 14, I was the assistant manager of the shoe store that I worked at. And then I graduated high school when I was 16. So at 17, I went off to university and I worked for a bank in their contact center. It was much, flexible to work around my school schedule. And I got promoted up through the ranks quite quickly. Actually, within 6 months, I was promoted. And I believe one of the things we need to be really mindful of in not only taking charge of our own careers and life, but is around, what we learn. And so for me, voracious learner. So I took the opportunity to take advantage of all this free education that the bank had. And so I started in like outbound telemarketing, like how horrible was that? And then moved my way into like the inbound contact center and learned all about personal banking. And then I moved into like the credit side. And then I got my securities license. So I actually, could buy and sell, securities. And I ended up leading large contact center operations for the bank that I worked for in their discount brokerage. And that got me noticed by a recruiter who came to me and asked if I would, be part of the process for a COO role, chief operating role, for a large outsourcing company. And that was a massive stretch role for me. And I was 24 years old and a new mother. And, but it was because I had at this point, like 6 years working in the banking experience, and that company had many banking clients. and contact center. And that was pretty much what all my background had been for the last number of years. And then I showed up as a very confident woman. I'm not a believer in fake it till you make it, except with confidence. When you need to, like, you put it on, you put that mask on, you walk in and you exude this confidence, even if underneath you're like feeling so nervous and scared. And so that was my first executive job at age 24 years old, a really big stretch role for me. But that actually set me up for the rest of my, career thus far. It was business to business, which I love. It's way more complexity, I find, in that kind of environment, because you've got, you know, companies who, pay your bills, and then you need to satisfy the needs of that company, either their employees or their own customers. So it's really complex. And so I loved it. But also the world of outsourcing, you don't make a lot of, like, it's lower margins. People outsource to save money for their companies. So I got really good at learning how to run a business in that environment, and then just sort of stayed beyond that. I've always also, I know a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs. I've also almost always had a side hustle, either just as a passion project that kind of grew into a business, one of which I ended up selling after that happened. And in another case, I invested in a business with no intent on actively running it, but purely as an investment. And then I ended up running it as its CEO for a year. So I now, operate at the C-suite and often consult for other C-suite executives. And to this day, I still have side hustles. No, it doesn't matter how much money I make.
I know. I love that. I once read, actually, when I was a foster care, I read an amazing book, and I cannot remember the title of it for the life of me. If I do, I'll put it in the notes. But it basically said the average millionaire has 7 streams of income, right? And so I was like, oh, so that means I need all these side hustles. And my brain that loves to do a million things at once just ran with it. And that's how my first business, which was a virtual assistant agency, that's how it came to be, because it was a side hustle very similar to yourself. So that's really interesting to me. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, you said you became the CEO when you became a new mom. So how do you juggle that? Because a lot of my listeners are moms and entrepreneurs. So how do you kind of juggle both sides?
Yeah. So I, like you, have lots of interests. I actually call myself a multi-potentialite, meaning I've got all of these diverse interests. And I've always been involved in a multitude of things. And so being a spouse, being a mother, being an executive that traveled a lot. I also have, since my late 20s or early 30s, also sat on a number of boards, and I'm a big fitness fanatic. And have a fairly active social life. So you try and people always say, like, Vic, how do you fit all of this stuff in? And so what I will say, is I've gotten very good at creating boundaries. And so learning what I need to say no to, what does not bring me or my family personal joy, or I also view it from a professional standpoint. If it doesn't bring me joy or value personally or professionally, I either don't do it, or I delegate it, or I outsource it. And so that's number one. I would be remiss if I didn't say that my partners in my life. So I was actually married to a woman for the first 11 years, and I gave birth to our 2 children while married to her. And I've now been with my husband for almost 10. They both have completely supported my career and our family, as I've been the primary earner. So I'd be remiss in saying, like, both of them were phenomenal in the support of my ability to do what I do from a career perspective.
That is amazing. I have a supportive husband as well, and I know, especially as former foster kid, that's something like I always dreamed of, right? Having that own support, that best friend to live with you, because having that type of childhood is so lonely. So I think that's amazing. I don't think I would have my businesses either without like my just the support, and I think it's also really hard for women to put those boundaries and to say, I cannot do this, to say no. I think that took me at least a couple of years to really like figure out that I was saying yes to everything and needed to stop, because it's
Yeah.
overwhelming and tired. And then your relationships start failing, your business starts failing, everything just kind of goes downhill. And you're like, I don't know, it's a season, I'm in a slump. And then you realize you just said yes to too many things.
Yeah. Well, and then what I will say, like, adjacent to this, is I have this other sort of philosophy of, like, no excuses. And I mean that whether it's around adversity, but also very specifically when we're talking about this, I have this saying that where there's conviction, there's capacity. And the no excuses comes in. Like if you truly have conviction about doing something, whether it's weight loss and getting healthier and getting to the gym, or it's something specifically for your business, or it's a side hustle, well, you have choices. That's my no excuses. You have a choice. And so the ability to create capacity. And so some of that is saying no, but it's also, are you Netflixing all evening, or are you making other choices in terms of how you're going to spend that time? And so that's where, sometimes we need to be, a little critical of ourselves and assess that. And so some's probably a little bit of all of those factors, like, feel like sitting on the couch today, versus just overcommitting yourself completely and learning what you need to start to say no to.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you feel at multiple times before you actually like get the hang of it. So give yourself some grace if you're in that learning curve, because you are gonna say yes when you should have said no, and it's okay. You'll know for next time. Now,
Exactly.
one of your specialties I'm absolutely in love with, and I think it's starting to become actually really popular in 2023, is personal branding. So can you tell me a little bit about, what that looks like with you?
Yeah, for sure. And it is an area that I am known quite a bit for. And it's just because I've now actively been focused on it. And I didn't always have the vernacular, the name for it. But quite honestly, since almost that first executive role, when I made a move from predominantly a B2C environment to B2B, and part of the way you compete in there is you get proposals. Sometimes they're cold proposals, and you've got need an RFP, respond for proposal. And it was kind of like, well, why do people want us? So it's creating like this unique value proposition, when it's, yes, there a lot has to do with, price and value, but there's other things connected to that. And, I realized so much around how important a person's brand was, period, and being known and building a strong reputation, both as an expert, but also around who we are, because people do business, people they like, they trust, and therefore they want to do business with. So although 20 something years ago, I wasn't calling it personal branding, not only for myself, but for my team, I moved from, again, an operational role to now all of a sudden in that COO role, I owned also sales and marketing, client management, et cetera. So it was kind of developing that. And so what I really realized is the brand is much bigger. In fact, I worked for IBM a number of years ago, and they call it eminence. And I actually kind of corrected to some extent. Eminence is the subject matter expertise for which we're known for, whether that's, the education that translates into the field or vocation we're in, we're a data scientist, you're an employment lawyer, whatever it is, and maybe even the industry that well. For me, financial services would be one of those. That's what that slice is. And I think a lot of people stop there. Put up your LinkedIn profile and you're like, here's my title, here's my company, here's a little bit of description around, what I'm hired to do. Well, that's not enough. You need to also, when you think about that, foundationally what your brand is about, that is one for sure. But the next is, what's your unique value proposition? What makes you different from someone else that has very similar education or vocation or industry experience? Why does someone want to choose you over them? And so for me, for example, part of my brand is built around a number of things: being radically candid, completely transparent, and very trustworthy. My word very much means something, both for my employees, and also the commitment I make to my clients. And so that's a part of it. I won't sell you something just to sell it to you, because that's what my company wants you to do. Let's have a conversation around what you actually need and what solves for that. So your unique value proposition. And part of that is thinking about what makes you different. And part of what makes you different is some of what you and I've talked about: our stories, our lived experience, and how it informs the way we operate in business and in life. And not everyone's going to be comfortable like you and I sharing some of that. And I don't think that everyone needs to be kind of the proverbial open book, but being authentic and sharing some of these nuggets from our past or what's contributed to how we've gotten here today is important about what makes us different, what makes us unique, but also I think people don't realize is just what builds connection with other people. And then once you've kind of figured out what that is, the last piece I'd say is, what do you want to be known for? Like, I think I've been really successful in business, but I'm not going to have a tombstone. I'll donate whatever's left of my body to science and for my organs and whatnot. But whatever, if there was a tombstone, like they're not going to have on it, like, that I've currently been a part of 18 mergers and acquisitions, that I've delivered hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, blah, like that's not it. So for me, the legacy is around the kind of impact I want to have on all those that I have the opportunity to work with, the communities I'm in, the people I coach and mentor, that kind of thing. So think about all of those elements. And then from there, it's about how and where are you going to tell that story? Where's the audience you want to connect with? What's your goal in terms of connecting and making sure that you stay like really consistent and relevant on point with that? And sorry, last thing is you can pivot and change over time, right? My 20-something-year-old self didn't anticipate I was going to be where I am now. And the legacy, I now want, I don't even know if I had one back then. So I'd also tell your audience, it can change over time and you'll make mistakes and you can pivot and correct.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you talked about having, your multiple side hustles and multiple businesses. And then, so when you're branding, you're doing so many things at once. How would you brand that?
Well, I think you need to find cohesively something that connects them all together. And a lot of times that's you as a human that does it. So then you're telling a little bit more of, your story. So you think of like me, corporate executive, I've been leading large businesses, but part of what's made them successful is leadership and building the right teams and culture, diversity and inclusion. So that's, and so I also am a public speaker. That's one of my side hustles. And I talk about those things, but they're all connected, but they're connected by who I am as a human. And so I tell people, to attempt to do that. Now, if, you've got, I don't know, a dog sitting business over here and your cosmetician on the side, like sometimes they're really disparate, but again, there's some connectedness or you also can create multiple profiles. So, I'm always Victoria. What you see digitally versus when you meet me face to face is always the same, but I have a private Facebook account and the public Facebook account. And I'm aware that whatever goes online, could get out anywhere. But, the tank tops that I wear to the gym with sometimes inappropriate sayings, I don't need my clients necessarily seeing coming up with their LinkedIn feed.
Yeah, exactly. That was one thing that I struggled with even up to like a year ago because I have a virtual assistant agency, I have a marketing agency, I'm a VA coach, I'm a speaker, I have the podcast. And so trying to like brand myself was so hard. And then I was like, wait, they're just all me. So that's where It's Natalie Guzman came in. And I think that made it really easy. And that's kind of how I train my clients now. I'm like, if you do a personal brand, if you change your mind, entrepreneurs at heart, we're always going to open another business. I feel like think almost every entrepreneur I've met, they have multiple businesses or side hustles, and it's because you figure out the bare bones of it, and then you just want to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so, and then you delegate a team, you build your teams, and you're on to the next projects. So I definitely love personal brands and using your name or who you are, because then you can change it. Like you said, you can pivot and you can, make your profiles and your content and everything that you put out into the social media world, to that business. So I think that's really a really good idea, and never be scared to pivot. I think a lot of clients come to me and they're like, I don't know. I don't want to do it. Like, I'm so scared. I worked on this for 2 years, but I'm like, that's not who you are anymore. So now we have to kind of pivot and start building it around who you are. So I think that's really cool.
Excellent.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me today. Can you let my audience know where to find you?
The best way is I have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com, and your audience can choose where to go out and connect with me on whatever their chosen social media platform is from there.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put that in the notes. So thank you again for joining me, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.